You get me, get you. You get me, feel it, you. You get me, get you. You get me, feel it, you. You get me, get you. Welcome. We are talking politics and religion without killing each other. I am your host, Corey Nathan. It is an honor to be a part of the Democracy Group. That's a network of podcasts that examines what's broken in our democracy and how we can work together to fix it. And what's really cool is I have a colleague from the Democracy Group with me, a new friend, actually. And before we get into it, remember, do all the things, or subscribe to the YouTube channel, follow, rate, review, all the things. Check out the new Substack. We have links in the show notes to make all of this easy to find. It really does help. Every bit of it helps so we can continue having great conversations like the one we're having today with Kamy Akhavan. Kamy Akhavan is the executive director for the USC Dornsife Center for the Political Future and the former CEO of procon.org, which is America's leading source of nonpartisan research on controversial issues. Kamy has 20 years of experience bridging divides, which, well, can sure come in handy these days, especially in this town today. But before we get into all that, we're speaking of bridging divides and conflict resolution in this country and indeed in the world as a whole. And our audience needs to know, did you end up taking Cameron to Sky Zone for his 8th birthday?
Corey, what a way to launch a show. Thank you. Yeah. And did I take my son to Sky Zone for his birthday? No, I did not. We didn't go to Sky Zone. That kid has got lots of varied interests. Uh, we did other things with that boy. Most recently, and part of why I'm wearing this shirt is I took him to see Parliament Funkadelic, one of my favorite all-time bands, and I'm wearing this shirt today as a bit of an homage to one of my musical heroes, Sly Stone, who sadly passed away just a couple days ago. So this is a way to have the funk live on.
Yeah, yeah. That was what actually we were talking before we hit record. We were talking about one of the cool things about being in DC all together was that we've known each other. We've been on Zooms together and we've known about each other's work, obviously being in the Democracy Group, but being together, especially at a time like this, it was just great to really get to know each other in person and really nurture a friendship. More, you go beyond an acquaintance or a business colleague, and nurture a friendship. So that was really cool. And one of our walks, we were talking about musical interests and our experience in our respective fight clubs.
Yeah.
So it was really great getting to know you, man.
Yeah,
Um,
that's right. I feel like a lot of what we do is combat sports, whether it's be a conversation or with fists and and feet. But that's the world we live in today. We got to
yeah.
be on guard.
Well, in all seriousness, I was kind of joking about Cameron. I mean, we talked about our kids and stuff like that. But one of the cool things in just prepping for our conversation is I stumbled across, I guess it must be your personal YouTube page where you share like various birthdays. And I got to know Cameron. You know, he doesn't know me, but I got to know him through the YouTube videos.
I love it. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, today was his very last day of ninth grade, so he's off at the beach with his buddies, having a good old time, and he's jealous of me because I get to spend my afternoon with you.
Yeah, that's that's awesome. So you live in Torrance, you work at USC. Um, as a lot of folks know, there's a lot going on in LA, our hometown now. How have you been? Have you been close to some of the violence that's broken out, or have you seen any of the peaceful protests? How are things going by you?
Well, like a lot of things in LA, we feel it even though we don't see it. I mean, LA is about 530 square miles, and this violence is restricted to about 1 square mile. So most of LA is unaffected. Most of LA is going about its business. But of course, it's all over our social media, our television, our radio, and we know people who are involved in this, and I certainly do. So it's been on my mind, and I've been near it, but I haven't been in it because you got to work to be in it. It is not everywhere in LA. That is a complete myth. It's really, really a small section of downtown LA where all of this action is happening, and it makes me feel really sad. It makes me feel really depressed about the degree to which our city and our state are working in opposition to our national government, and the national government is acting in what is not in our city or state's best interest. They think it's in a greater national interest to demonstrate that, look, the federal government has the power, and if we believe that there's a threat, then we have every right to go and eliminate those threats and round up the criminals and the bad folks and get them out of here. And I understand that, but the reality on the ground is there's not just criminals who are being caught in these ICE raids. It's regular folk, hardworking people. Some of them who are absolutely here illegally, and that's bad. But they are not the criminals. They were not what was explicitly stated as the reason for launching these raids. It's gone a level deeper, and that's making a lot of people, including some prominent Republicans, quite uncomfortable.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's definitely a threat that is felt beyond even the presence of actual, ICE officers. In some cases, yeah, to your point, I was just visiting with, we have a local bank up here, Mission Valley Bank, and I was just visiting with the lady who's in my business networking group up here. And the person, another person from our networking group, had two people from her business that were taken up. Now they are legal residents. They have work visas to be working with our friend, but they were taken up without due process. They were arrested without due process. I don't know if they're going to be detained because they do have their proper paperwork, but just the idea that they can be arrested. That affects their families. That they have kids at school. Like, who's going to pick up their kids? If you can imagine, you have a ninth grader. It's not that long ago that you had a second and a third grader. But this also touches upon a part of your story that I think unique. Maybe you uniquely resonate with it because you do have a fascinating story, having been born in Iran. Your family moved to southern Louisiana when you were a toddler. And correct me if I get any of this wrong, but then your family moved back. Was that in the late 70s, early 80s that you moved back to Iran?
Right. We moved back in 1979 after the Shah was deposed from government. And a lot of people who were, free thinkers in Iran who believed in democratic norms and wanted freedoms that places like the United States represented, they thought the Shah was a dictator. And they thought
Mm,
he was, yes, there was many things he did that were good, but it was too strong. It was an authoritarian. And they were eager for the day when those authoritarian ways would either diminish or he'd be removed from power. So when he was removed from power, many people who had left Iran thought this is an opportunity to be back a part of a more democratic Iran. But what ended up happening, as you and the whole world know, is once that power vacuum was created, it wasn't just filled with pro-democracy people. It was filled with folks who were far, far, far worse than the Shah ever was. And these are people who were religious clerics who believed in theocracy, who believed in absolute control of government, and they did not believe in freedoms. So people like my mom, who could wear a miniskirt and go to a nightclub and have drinks and dance to James Brown, now all of a sudden, not only do you have to wear a full garment covering your entire body. You have to cover your hair. You can't drink anymore. You can't even ride a bicycle if you're a female in Iran. That just happened, boom, within a matter of months. And so, one of the most highly educated nations on earth, one of the most advanced societies, the oldest continuous civilization on the planet, is the one that is now under such extreme repression that it's just a heartbreak.
yeah.
And so that's why we went back, was to be part of the good, but the bad is what ended up happening. And all these revolutionaries, all these activists, they ended up getting rounded up, many of them jailed or killed. And on top of that, the Iran-Iraq war breaks out because the Iraqis decide there's a power vacuum, there's an opportunity for them to take control as well, and they were supported by the U.S. government. And at the time, Iran was the US's largest defense partner. We purchased more weapons from the United States than Israel did. So we were BFFs, and then all of
Yeah.
a sudden we weren't, and things really really changed. So at that time, 1970 and 1980, when this war is ongoing, we're hiding in the basement. Iraqi planes are flying overhead, dropping bombs. Everyone is scared. All the lights are off at night. People are taping up their windows. There's when you wake up in the morning, you're just wondering what neighborhood got hit. It's very traumatic and awful for anybody to live in a war zone. And my parents thought, what the hell have we done? We brought our kids into this environment. We need to get the heck out of here. And so we had to smuggle ourselves out of the country and smuggled ourselves into Turkey, went to the US Embassy there and said, please, we want to go back to the United States. Will you let us back in, US Embassy? And the US Embassy said, no, sorry, you're bad guys. You're Iranians. You took American hostages. You were here and you left. So that's on you. So no. So we thought, gosh, we got to keep trying. So we moved to Bulgaria, lived there for a few months, tried the same thing, U.S. Embassy in Bulgaria, couldn't get anywhere with that. And we moved to France, tried the same thing. Hey, U.S. Embassy in France, can we get back in the U.S. when we couldn't? So at that point, we're like, look, we can't go back to Iran. We'd like to go back to the United States, but we can't. So what do we do now? We ended up moving to Turkey and living in Ankara, Turkey. And my folks tried one more time. Let's just try one more time. To get back in. And that time it worked. And the reason why it worked is because my dad's employer was an architect in Opelousas, Louisiana, who spent a lot of money out of his own pockets to hire an immigration attorney for us, made it happen and said, we need, my dad's name is Fred, we need Fred back. We need, he was a great architect. We need him back in the United States, and I'll pay for all the paperwork and things to sponsor them to be back here. And if it wasn't for Mr. Tolson, I'd be some kid living in Turkey instead of a bridge builder here in the United States. And so every year, I know if my dad's crying on the phone around Christmas time, it's because he's talking to Jack Tolson and
Mm.
letting him know just what a wonderful thing he did for our family and made such a big impact. So when I think about immigrants, I think about not just my family, but so many people who have these kinds of stories about escaping violence, about looking for opportunity, about wanting to do better for their families, and thinking that the United States is the land of opportunity. And of course it is. It absolutely is. And it just breaks my heart that so many people end up here and find that the long arm of the law is now, turned against them, and that people are being rounded up, even though they are in the process of doing everything the right way, going through the green card application, filling out the paperwork, waiting all the time, hiring the attorneys, doing everything you're supposed to do, and still getting imprisoned for it and deported for it.
And there are so many stories that I'm really curious to learn more about. One is if I were to ever to get to talk to Fred, I'd love to hear him talk about that time. Um, just as a dad, not even like the narrative of it, but just as a dad, like what he was going through with a young family and how to make it work. Literally, like how to make ends meet. How do we physically get my little family from here to there, right?
Yeah.
How do I subsist? How do I pay for the hotel that we are staying at, or keep a roof over our heads, quite literally? In some cases, even more with even more front, because in Iran, I heard you tell a story about how everyone had to turn the lights off at night because it was the lights that the adversaries were bombing,
Yeah.
right? Like that's what I'm curious about. With if I were to speak to, have you spoken to your dad about what his mindset was, like how he was able to actually logistically figure out how to make it all work?
Absolutely. I talk about this a lot because I'm also fascinated by it. And what he told me is that there was more questions than answers,
Mm,
and that there was a lot of uncertainty, and that whatever finite amount of savings that they had for us to go on this experiment, it was really a pro-democracy experiment. Help Iran become more democratic. That once he realized that that experiment was failing, the money could only stretch so far, and so whatever nest egg we had at the time quickly evaporated. By the time we eventually made it back into Louisiana, we were living in subsidized housing. We were living in basically Section 8 housing. My clothes came from either dumpsters, that's literally true. I had one pair of shoes per year. And if I outgrew them or if they were way too big, whatever, that's your one pair. Garage sales were popular for us. I remember one year for Christmas getting lifesavers and a kite, and I was thrilled because that was more than I had before. So it was real poverty. And my neighbors were in the same situation, right? My neighbors in South Louisiana they're all very poor people because we're living in this kind of community together. And so as a kid, you just think that's normal. You
mm,
know what you have, you don't necessarily know what you don't have because you don't have it. And so yeah, for my parents' experience, they were just focused. What can we do to be more successful? How can we get some more money? How can we? And they, for them, the answer was education. They have to. My dad went and back to school and got a degree in architecture just so he could advance. He got a contractor's license so he could advance. My mom got a master's degree and then a PhD degree in nursing so she could advance. They really emphasized education for us. If we weren't studying, you ought to be. And for many immigrants, it's the same thing. They're so focused on education and making money and getting ahead in the community. They didn't raise me speaking Persian. They raised me speaking English. They wanted me to assimilate and really be able to be successful in the United States. And so, good on them. Kudos to them. I thank them all the time for now being on the positive end of an otherwise pretty terrible experience. But I'd say for us, it all had a happy ending because look where we ended up.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So, what year did the family get back to the United States?
This whole Turkey, France, Bulgaria, that whole thing was about a year and a half.
Okay.
And so
So
I
you were back in the States by like 81 or so, 82?
exactly, yes.
So I'm guessing that you getting the first series of Jordans was not on the
Not on the list, man. No, not on
or
the
getting the Michael Jackson Thriller album, not on the Christmas list.
no, I remember doing PE wearing cowboy boots. My mom said I get one pair of boots and we went to Payless shoes, and that's what I really wanted. And so I had to wear my cowboy boots for everything, including PE.
That's
I mean,
awesome.
that's yeah, awesome slash sad, but I didn't know any better. This was to me, that's how everybody lived. But that's the perspective of a child. And now I look back on it with I mean, there's no shame. It's just I don't shame people for not having money. They just don't have money, and that's no reason for judgment. And I definitely learned that lesson personally in the hard way.
We almost my family almost took pride in not being not driving the fancy cars, and yeah, I grew up on a teacher's salary basically, so not quite in the same dire straits that your family was at times, but we did what we had to do, and we took there was valor in being frugal, creatively frugal when we had to be. Were you still in Southern Louisiana when you went to high school, or did your family move after that?
We moved just before high school, and so I left eighth grade or middle school in Opelousas. I was at Opelousas Catholic High School, and then ended up at J.H. Hull Middle School here in Torrance. And I was there for a couple months before the school year ended. And so my whole high school experience was at Torrance High School, where Louis Zamperini, the great war hero, was from there. We had some famous athletes, Jason Kendall, the baseball player. Anyway, so it was an old school 1917. I filmed Beverly Hills 90210 while I was in high school. I thought that was super cool. I was filming Buffy the Vampire Slayer while I was there. That was cool. So yeah, it was a strong education. My parents intentionally moved to Torrance because of the schools, and I'm still living in Torrance. I've circled around here and there. I've lived in other parts. I've lived in Vancouver. I've lived in LA, but here I am back in Torrance, and proud to be.
So how brutal was the campaign when you ran for president of the debate club?
It- there's certain jobs everybody wants and certain jobs nobody wants, and that happened to be one that was not very competitive because not a lot of folks wanted it. And so for me, the experience that and thank you for bringing it up, Corey, was a transformative moment in my whole existence was being in 10th grade and having gone to the debate club a couple of times and thinking it was mildly interesting that when they asked for who wants to be president the following year, and I raised my hand. And I don't know why I did. It was not in my plan. I hadn't discussed it with my friends. I just spur of the moment decision thought, yeah, I can do this and I want to do it. And then committed to running that campaign and becoming the president and growing the club. And through the course of that, really understanding what it's like to see an issue from a completely different lens. Because as you know, in the world of debate, sometimes you don't get to pick the side you're debating. You're just assigned a spot, or you may be assigned a spot and then you show up for the debate and boom, all of a sudden now you have to debate the other side. And so just being able to articulate arguments that are not my own, that are not from my heart, but I have to convey them and persuade using that language as best I can was a really valuable skill and one that I thought was going to make me a amazing attorney one day, as attorneys can do that very well. And I was just learning those skills. But it really fueled my love of politics, my love of debate. I knew every member of Congress, all the leadership positions, who's on what committees. I was really obsessed with it. I'd wear a suit and sometimes a tie to school because I was so into politics. That was going to be my calling. And look, here I am wearing a Parliament t-shirt, decades later. But such is life.
That's awesome. It's funny because in junior high school, I started wearing a tie occasionally
Yes,
to school.
my
But
brother.
you might be able to appreciate this. So in my house, my dad was very politically engaged. So in the background, there was always there was a PBS show called McNeil Lehrer, which
Oh
I think
yeah.
was the predecessor to NewsHour. There was always a Time magazine and several other publications that he would get monthly. Um, if I engaged politically, it was through more pop culture, like a show like MASH was really big in our house. But the one show that really gave me started to pique my curiosity about politics was Family Ties. So that explains the tie. Alex P. Keaton, Michael J. Fox's character, was very appealing to me, but specifically because he was, I forgot what if it was Nixon's picture or Reagan's picture that was in his bedroom, but he was within this super liberal family as a conservative as we understood it back then. But just the idea that he could live as a loving member within that family really appealed. I was even conscious of that distinction that he had. So I bring this up partly for like historical context of the time that
Sure.
because we grew up, we're within a few years of each other, but
Yeah.
we have a lot of the same cultural references. But I was curious if there were, number one, if there were certain candidates or issues that you began to become very passionate about, or have you always been a pretty open-minded guy and your training in the early years in debate gave you that way of thinking of like you could be open to different possibilities on different sides of an issue or different candidates?
Yeah, it's a great question because I really do think that debate taught me to be open-minded, and it made me think that my opinions were not that relevant, really. What was more important to me was the depth of my knowledge and the strength that I had in my own conviction. But what my opinion was, and everybody's got opinions, and who cares? It's not a cause for division. It's not a cause for separation from friends. It's just an opinion, and we can have 1,000 opinions about 1,000 different things, and we might agree on 10% of them, and that's okay. And so it really gave me that kind of perspective that what really matters is not other people's opinions. What really matters is how people treat each other, how they communicate with each other, whether it's with respect or with malice or hostility, and whether or not they are open and they're kind and they're loving, or whether they're jerks. And really, that's debate taught me that. Debate taught me critical thinking. It taught me to question what people are saying. It taught me that just because an adult says it doesn't mean that they have any particular expertise. And it taught me that if someone has expertise in one area, it doesn't mean they have expertise in every area. They might know that one thing really well and know nothing about other things. It really bothered me that as someone who is so knowledgeable about government, knowing all the members and even what legislation they're sponsoring and who co-sponsored, and I mean, really nerding out on government and politics, and being 16 years old and not being able to vote, and that there's people and dying to vote, and there's people who are 20s, 30s, all the way up to whatever age, who are like, I don't care, I'm not voting. I'm like, what do you mean you're not voting? This is the most important thing you could be doing. So I was all in on civic engagement and democracy. And the issue that really struck me was it was all of them. I could talk to somebody and be really moved by it. I'll say early on, when my grandfather had colon cancer, he was a military veteran and someone that I never, ever, ever thought would use drugs. He used marijuana to help ease the pain from his chemotherapy treatments. And that made me think, hey, maybe there's something to this, because if this guy who's like a really hard line, no drugs guy is like, I need this, then I will, maybe there's something to marijuana. And it kind of got me going down the rabbit hole about studies and efficacy and government programs and the investigative new drug program the U.S. had launched that had been around since the 1970s. They still have a platform at the University of Mississippi. I really learned a ton about this, and I even met some of the patients who were receiving government grown marijuana, and asking for their stories and using the Freedom of Information Act to get supplemental materials from the government about their programs and really just trying to understand it. And so I cared a lot about that issue because it was personal. And I had talked to many other patients that had benefited from medical use of marijuana as well. Not that I would recommend it for everybody. I don't. But I just thought for some people that's going to be the thing that makes them feel better. And what's the harm? So let them use it. So I cared a lot about that. But you name it. I tried hard to learn about a lot of different issues because of that debate mindset.
So that's really affirming to hear someone like you with such in-depth, long experience in the field that understanding and reckoning with the limits of one's own expertise, right? That you don't have to be an expert in everything, let alone anything, but also prioritizing. I think you and I share this. Like if you ask me to fight a war over any particular issue, I can't think of one right now. I know certain issues, if you will, that I feel very strongly about right now. I feel very strongly about our constitutional order, but it's too big of an issue. It's not one issue, right? But even that, I've been saying since at least 2008 that the one issue that's really important to me is what you just said, how we talk to each other, how we talk about each other across differences. So that's all of that to say, it makes so much sense that you ran an organization called procon.org for almost 15 years. How did you get that gig? And tell us a little bit about that job and that organization.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, so Um, I used to work in independent film distribution, getting art films released onto big theater screens in the United States and throughout the world, going to film markets, buying and selling film
Did
rights.
we
And
talk about this, by the way?
we did. We talked a little bit about this. Yeah, that's right. So we have some commonalities there
I'm
too.
trying
And
to wonder if I ever pitched you, like if I was ever in your office pitching you on one of the films I was working on.
it's very possible. Uh, but I remember doing all that stuff and thinking this industry pays nothing. I know I really love it, but it's not a good paying position. And I'd done other kinds of gigs. I worked with internet casinos for a while. I was doing marketing for them. That paid decent because they had suitcases full of cash, hoping they were going to be the next Caesar's Palace online, or whatever it was. But all that's to say that these jobs didn't pay a whole lot. So when I moved back to the United States from Vancouver, Canada, I thought I'm just going to make as much freaking money as I possibly can. And I ended up in management consulting, like a lot of people with that same motivation. And it did. It paid really, really well. And I remember I was 4 years into a position, and I was at a warehouse in East Los Angeles at 2 o'clock in the morning doing an inventory so that I could figure out a process to reduce the amount of time it took to unload trailer trucks so I can get the goods from those trucks onto the shipping floor at least 10 seconds faster. And if I could do that, because we were pumping out 10,000 orders a day, it would be a significant savings. So here I am using all my education and expertise and operationalism and really trying hard to do this. And then the other part of me is thinking, it's Saturday night. My wife's at home, uh, maybe out having fun or asleep. What am I doing in a warehouse in East LA carrying about 10 seconds on trailer unload time? I don't care. And then that's when I said, I got to start looking for something else. And I don't care what it pays. I learned then that it was not about the money for me. And I ended up looking at the time, it was monster.com, and
Right.
it was this person saying, look, I have a back of an envelope concept. It's for an organization called Procon, but I don't know how to grow it or build it. I just know that this idea has merit, and it's based on Ben Franklin's idea about how to make decisions using what Ben Franklin called moral algebra. It's a way to objectively make a decision by listing pros on one side of a sheet of paper and cons on the other side of a sheet of paper, and then weighing and considering the pros and cons. So I thought, yeah, that's a cool idea. It's simple. And if you can do something simple like that for large numbers of people, then you will make the process of being an informed citizen so much easier. So I'm all in, and we're not telling them what to think. We're not trying to influence their thinking one way or the other. We just honestly want to present the best research on two sides in as simple a format as possible so that we can make it easy to be an informed citizen. That was the goal. And my first When I first started, we were reaching about 5,000 people a month. By the time I left, we were reaching about 2.5 million people a month. We really grew the organization, reached over 300 million people over the course of my 14 and a half years there. I worked with about 13,000 schools in all 50 states and about 100 countries. It was wildly successful. And the exit strategy was get it acquired by somebody else. And Encyclopedia Britannica came along and we made a deal, keep it free, keep it nonpartisan, and keep it going for 25 more years. They said yes, yes, yes. And we handed them passwords and now it's theirs. So the organization lives on and I'm out. And that's how I ended up going to my rival university from
I was going to say you're a UCLA
USC.
guy, undergrad and graduate work, and now you're at USC. So
Now
talk about having to bridge divides.
amen, man. Amen. It's so true. We got to walk the walk and not just talk the talk. And there's so many things in life where in theory you're okay with it, but in practice you're not. And I thought, if I'm reporting myself and portraying myself and identifying as a bridge builder, then I have to work at USC. What better place for me to work?
Yeah.
And so I was eager to say yes to that position, not just for the challenge of it, but also for the opportunity, because where I ended up landing was one of the top five institutes of politics in the country, and still the only one with a bipartisan leadership structure where we have a Bob Shrum, legendary Democratic strategist on one side, and Mike Murphy, a legendary Republican strategist on the other side, and they co-run that center. And so I'm honored to sort of be the hands, the COO, the managing director of this place, so that we can really grow this operation and do two things. One is model civil discourse at national levels, just like you do on your show, which I'm a big fan of. By the way, Corey, you know that. But we really want to amplify what civil discourse looks like. A lot of things in life, if you can't see it, you can't be it. So we want people to see, look, prominent Democrats and prominent Republicans can communicate across difference without hostility and with respect and find common areas of interest that they can work on together for the good of the nation. Awesome. See, it's not just like on the news. People actually do it, and we're showing them how. So we wanted to do that from the grass tops and from the grassroots. We wanted to really train young people to go into political life, whether it's in working in government or congressional offices or campaigns, but also working in PR, advocacy groups, nonprofit organizations, whatever kind of social change they want to see or support, be able to do that in a way that doesn't bring the baggage of hyper partisanship with them. So they can really be effective change makers in society with all of the practical skills that they can gain through our center. Skills like how do you become an effective, active listener? How do you have conversations across difference? How do you develop and grow empathy? How do you do interviews in front of governmental organizations? How do I spiff up my resume? Like super practical stuff. And with that, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students are now every year uh, being involved in our center and going into the workforce, going to politics or civic engagement of some type with that kind of really practical orientation. And we think we need them. We need a political future. Too many young people think our system is gross and rigged, and they're right. And we're like, look, you need to be part of the change because you already know what's going to happen if you're not. It's going to continue to fester this way, and we really need things to be better. So please help us make this better. Please make it better. Each one of us is inheriting democracy, and this inheritance is a gift that many people have died for. And we're like, what do we do now that this is in our hands? How do we cultivate and shape and do our best with this? And that's what we're giving students, is making them aware, like, this is precious. You need to do what you can to support it in the ways that are relevant and authentic for you. So anyway, Corey, long answer to your short your short question.
So I got to see there were a couple of your former students in DC, and I got to see the rapport that you had with them, the respect and the affinity they had for you. I watched a podcast with a couple of your students interviewing you, and that is clear. Also, the effects that the program has on students, seeing, for example, just some of the nonprofits that some of the students have started as a result of some of the classes that you teach there and have gone on for years afterwards to really grow certain efforts. So that's all clear. And when I think about who runs it, Mike Murphy and Bob Shrum, yes, I see the differences, not just in their careers and their trajectories, but in today's climate, A guy like Mike Murphy is an interesting he's an interesting character because while I still consider him, I don't know, a descendant of the William F. Buckley school of conservatism, right? Or maybe more in more recent. I don't know if he would align with the Jack Kemp school of compassionate conservatism, but somewhere in that vicinity politically. But the fact that he is a pro-democracy conservative means to someone who is an avid supporter of Donald Trump, and Trump's version of republicanism, Mike Murphy might as well be a Marxist. You know what
Right.
I mean? So here's my question is, would the same students today or over the last 5 to 10 years that are applying to Claremont McKenna or Liberty University, would they also be applying to USC's Center for the Political Future?
I think the answer is yes. I mean, USC has the privilege of being a top 30 university. It's going to be a magnet for top talent, period. We have a lot of conservative students. For conservatives that I work with who lament universities and say, oh, they're woke indoctrination centers. That might be true for some universities. It's certainly not true at ours. There's a lot of conservative students. We had, Charlie Kirk on campus. We've had Mark Meadows on campus. We've had folks from Breitbart on campus. We've had, I mean, so many prominent conservatives on campus without being shouted down or canceled. They're just having exchanges. And there's a lot of students who love what they have to say and a lot of students who find it abhorrent.
Hmm.
But you can't, like what did Van Jones say? You can't pave the jungle. We need students to be exposed to these things so that they can become more resilient because the future for them is going to be one of their own making. And it's not always going to be smooth sailing where everyone agrees with them. There will be times where they're seriously challenged and have to question their own beliefs and identities or really try to persuade someone of the merit of their own viewpoints. And that's where it's very useful to be able to flex your opinion muscles and strengthen them by interacting with people who don't necessarily agree with you. That's the whole way that anything grows. It's grown through some type of challenge so that it can stretch and grow and go beyond what it already is. And so if it's never challenged, it'll never grow. And so in order to get our minds to do that and our bodies to do that and our opinions to do that, we have to keep them constantly challenged. And that's why I say my opinion doesn't really matter because I think I know what I think until I talk to you on a certain issue, and you might persuade me to think differently. And that is true for anybody that I have a conversation with. Every person that I meet and that you meet knows more than we do about many, 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 many things. So we have opportunities to learn from everyone all the time. And so just approach that with some humility, saying, what does this person know a lot about that I'm curious about? This is my opportunity to learn. I don't have to have lived that person's entire life. I could talk for a few minutes with them and know more than I could know from reading several books on the subject because this is coming from a person's lived experience. All that's to say that I really believe in the power of conversation as an opportunity for learning, and I really believe in challenging yourself. The thing you believe the most is perhaps the thing you should question the most.
Oh, that's interesting. So I I do think that the last year or two, we've seen some robust criticisms of some of the excesses, some of the illiberal impulses that we've seen. Uh, if I say the far left, that's almost insufficient to describe it, but there have been illiberal uh, excesses from folks who historically we might identify with the left or with progressive causes, right? And you've alluded to them. We've seen campuses all around the country where speakers would show up on campus and be canceled, be shouted down, be threatened. Many instances of that over the last 15 or so years. But you say that speakers like Charlie Kirk have been on there. I saw even like I think there are certain instances where even a Dr. Phil would be shouted down on certain campuses, and you had Dr. Phil. What what are the structures or rules of the road, or what mechanisms can you put, or what culture can you cultivate to allow for students from all different political and social perspectives to be willing to sit through someone whose public positions they so strongly disagree with?
It's a profound question because a lot of organizations, a lot of workplaces, a lot of universities, a lot of families are asking themselves that very question. How can you have a conversation that stays on the rails? How can you have a conversation that's respectful across difference, even when you're talking to someone whose viewpoints on certain issues might be, you might think as the worst, even like they're physically threatening to your identity and way of life. So how do you have a conversation with those kind of folks? And so for me, the answer is it's a lot of it is mindset. So you go in with the intention of not to persuade, but you go into a conversation with the intent to really understand, because maybe that person's not a jerk. Maybe that person has a way of looking at the world that comes from how they grew up, who their parents were, who their siblings were, what kind of conditions they were raised in that has led to this viewpoint. And so initially, the first thing we do is say, like, look, treat the person with respect and give them the benefit of the doubt and just listen. And if you can listen respectfully and with the intent to understand and be curious, then that's a very positive first step. I don't want to undersell it at all because it's a hugely important first step. Now, let's say you do that, and in the course of listening, we realize, this person grew up, maybe really poor, maybe with really strict parents, or maybe deeply, deeply religious type of background. And it would make sense how, in certain contexts, they have developed these kinds of viewpoints. And so I can't think that they're a jerk for being raised how they were raised. That's
Right.
just, that's not their fault. So let me just understand it. And then once the person feels heard, and this is for me a super valuable life lesson. When a person feels heard, the chemicals that wash their brain are the same chemicals that when they feel love. And we can do that by listening. So if you can make a person feel heard, AKA feel loved, then you can earn their trust. And when you have trust from someone, now you have an opportunity to be able to present differing opinions and perspectives. So to answer your question this long way is the way that these conversations on campuses and workplaces and families and everywhere else need to happen is they have to go in with a mindset, and this can be spelled out in company policy, university policy, saying unless it's hate speech, we will accommodate speakers. We will have structured conversations where the intent is to listen with respect and curiosity. We have an opportunity to question and to challenge those viewpoints through open Q&A. And we have the opportunity to learn from each other. We don't have to agree. That's never the point, is to let's all agree on these issues. Not at all. You can walk out as strongly convicted as when you walked in. But the point is now you understand where that other side comes from. And more importantly, that other side probably understands where you're coming from more because you listened to them and gave them your trust and respect. So I tell students all the time, if you really want to be a powerful champion and advocate for the cause you care about the most passionately, the best tool you have are your ears, not your mouth.
That's really interesting because we've talked a lot about, at least several times over the years, about the chemical reaction that human beings have when we are responding to stimuli of fear and anger, right? And a lot of media outlets have actually made a business plan based on that. That
Totally.
our brains have the same reaction as if we're taking a hit of crack cocaine. So you're talking about something that is in parallel to that, but like the better angel version of that,
Right.
that our
Exactly
brains
right.
respond to being heard, being listened to. What I think a mutual friend of ours, you're friendly with Monty Guzman, right? Of Brave Nation.
Yes.
Yeah. I know you guys have been in conversation together, and David Brooks, his latest, his book of late 2023. That our brains, I never thought of it that way. I never realized that our brains are literally having a chemical reaction to being heard, to being listened to being understood, even if the person doesn't come out the other side agreeing with our propositions. That's so interesting.
I think so too. So much of this is brain chemistry, and so much of this is just intuitive. If someone is respectful to you, you're slightly more inclined to be respectful right back. And when someone is really listening to you and not just nodding their head or repeating the last thing you said, but you can tell if someone's really listening to you, feel it. And
Mm.
that feeling is like, wow, okay, this person really understands me. They really are giving me their respect. So, you know what? I'm going to show them some of that back. And it comes down to that. For conservatives, the word respect is one of the most powerful words. When you talk to conservatives about bridging divides, that's often a word that comes out as we want to be treated with respect. And for liberals, they'll use different words, but it's basically the same thing. They might say we want to have conversations about what's fair and what's equitable, and conservatives will say respect. But really, all we're saying is be good to me and I'll be good right back. And it comes down to this golden rule. I mean, ultimately, how many conversations have we had in our lives where it'll boil down to something you can put on a bumper sticker? But basically, it comes down to that golden rule. You treat others how you want to be treated. And I think that's absolutely true in conversations. And it's easy to do in person. It's very hard to do online. And online, in social media settings where there's greater sense of anonymity, where there's more of a groupthink, there's more of a push and pull based on what other things we've read, and it becomes performative. We're performing a role rather than being our authentic true selves. People say crazy stuff that is not necessarily reflective of who they are or who they want to be. It's just they get caught up in these things. So I'm a big proponent of sometimes you just got to physically be with other people so you can just talk it out. You can feel their body energy. You can see what kind of eye contact they're making. You can tell if they're leaning towards you or leaning away from you. You can tell how much they're mirroring your body language, even unconsciously, because you're so in step with each other. So I'm a big fan of doing that. And sometimes I think in workplaces when they say like let's ditch the physical workspace so that we can all be on Zoom together. I get it economically, that makes good sense. But in terms of team building and friendships and relationships, nothing beats in person.
Yeah, yeah. I am trying to uh, extend what we do in the online spaces as well. But I'm realizing that there are certain platforms that lend themselves to at least having some curation. You know, maybe I just haven't found a way in a space like YouTube where you can't really limit or give some qualifications of who can participate in comments, for example. But I'm finding on a platform like Facebook where at the very least everyone who's commenting, I can click a button and say at least I'm not. This isn't going to be public. The only qualification is they have to be connected to me. So they might not be connected to each other, but they're connected to me. So at the very and they're coming on to my posts and certain things. I'm trying to acculturate those who do participate that there are some loose rules of the road. Um, and listen, sometimes I've made a mistake, like, and I'm evolving on certain, even those loose rules. Like for a while, if something was already proven to be a falsehood, somebody saying that the 2020 election was stolen, that to me, I didn't need to. I was taking down because we didn't need to rehash that argument. I didn't need to give further air to that.
Hmm.
But I've evolved on that, thinking that you know what, leave those up there because the by muting someone's speech. I'm not eliminating their opinion. I'm not countering their opinion. If anything, I'm just giving fuel to their fire of thinking, oh, he doesn't believe in the freedom of speech.
Yes,
So
fair.
there are some things, but even as someone who's curating these conversations, a lot of them, don't get me wrong. Like I'm not in a big formal setting like USC or Braver Angels or these big formal settings. I'm more of the local pub kind of a setting, But there's a place for that too. We got to figure out how to talk to our buddy,
Absolutely.
that we know from the local business community at a local pub. But okay, so here's another big question that I'd love for you to address, and maybe we can focus it just on what's happening now in LA. So speaking of one of these online conversations, I didn't even refer to the protests in LA. I posted a direct quote from the First Amendment about the freedom of speech, the freedom to peaceably assemble. And apparently, a lot of folks understood what I was referring to just by quoting from
Okay.
from that part of the Constitution. And the comments from different people that I know align differently were very different, as you can imagine. So immediately, I got a number of the pictures of people that were turning cars over and burning cars and throwing rocks and painting graffiti on the sides of federal buildings. A number of people, and then there are other people who are There weren't people who were saying that's not true, that's not happening. There were a number of other people who were affirming the First Amendment, and if they were responding to the people who were posting the pictures of those who were engaging in vandalism and violence, they were saying we can all agree that the violence, there's no place for violence, but we can also agree that the right to peaceably assemble. Peaceably became a real hinge word here, and everybody agreed on the peaceable part. But I think the guys who were posting the pictures, anyway, I provide all this context to ask what are the causes of polarization? What are the causes of how people can see a quote from the First Amendment and have such a different context, such a different view of what's happening, even in this one instance? What feeds into all of that?
Yeah. I mean, what are the causes of polarization is such a profound question, and I definitely want to address it. But I really hear what you're saying. Like you could say a relatively innocuous statement and it will be interpreted so differently depending on that person's worldview, whether they identify as a liberal or conservative. And it's dramatically different and they have almost nothing to do with each other. So it feels like people aren't really talking to each other. They're talking right past each other, sticking to those talking points. So I've been in those situations like you described, with just citing the First Amendment and just seeing what kind of conversation ensues. But the reason why that happens, I think, basically boils down to a couple things. And these are not my novel ideas. These are coming from a lot of experts who study this stuff. And one of my favorites, and maybe one of yours, Jonathan Haidt,
Oh
uh,
yeah.
who, who basically talks about forces that bring us together, centripetal forces, and forces that drive us apart, centrifugal forces. So the forces that bring us together would be things like going to the mall, like we all did in the 80s. That was like the social space to be, or going to the movie theaters, or playing in sports leagues, or going to concerts, or being in places where we're physically congregating, grocery stores, restaurants, and how that public square is shrunk so much over the decades because you can order whatever from Amazon. You can get Grubhub or Postmates to deliver food to your house. You can watch concerts on YouTube. Why go there? The malls are basically, most of them are gone. And there's no reason to go out into retail world when you can purchase things online. The sports leagues are down. The attendance at concerts is down. Participation in churches, mosques, synagogues, they're all down. Union participation down. All these places where people physically interact down. So in we're not meeting people physically anymore. We're encountering each other online. And then if you think about that, and then what's happening online, we're not experiencing a representative slices of our society. We are seeing complete distortions of society because of the way that our technology is designed to reflect back on us what we want to see. So, for example, if I start typing something into Google search, it says, "Where can I?" And then it will fill in the blank.
That's
And
right.
mine will look very different than yours, and it will look different than the other, 5 billion people on this planet. Each one will be custom to them because the technology thinks it knows what you want to see, and it's going to deliver that. Same with our social media feeds. When I look every day, I will see more or less the same people that I'm used to seeing because it knows I tend to like them, I like to share them, I tend to comment on them, and I'm not seeing stuff from people who I don't do that with. And so it ends up becoming where they become an echo chamber or a filter bubble, or we go further down this very linear, narrow way of experiencing our community. And so imagine if our public physical spaces are shrinking and our digital spaces are growing, but within our digital spaces, it's not about broadcasting, it's really narrowcasting to these really small slivers of our community and very like-minded people. We just lack exposure to viewpoints that are different from ours. We lack exposure to people who are different from us. And then when we do encounter them, all of a sudden it's threatening because we watch the news and we see that things that are different are bad and scary, and we feel like that's an enemy that must be stopped. And it's not just that, oh, we agree to disagree. No, it's the other side is not just wrong, the other side is evil. And when something is evil, anything we do to justify stopping that evil is completely fair. And we must stop that evil. And that's the mindset. That's called affective polarization. And that kind of polarization has been on the rise for the last several decades. We have always disagreed with one another in this country. We have many famous examples throughout history of physical altercations in Congress, violent disagreement. So disagreement is not the issue. It's the thinking that one group of people is not just wrong, but evil, and having that be so pervasive that if you give me your viewpoint on one issue, you're immediately in my in group or you're in my enemies list. And that instantaneous judgment and reaction is the consequence of this deep division that we have in our society from basically those two forces, the unifier shrinking and the dividers increasing. And I've only talked about one divider, that's technology, but there's 10 others we could go through and just talk about how it's further fueling this trend where I'm right, you're evil.
So on this particular, on the issue of what's happening in Los Angeles right now, I am trying to hold space for the many factors that led to the moment where we are. And I think I could sit down with any number of folks and say, here's what we can agree on. For example, um, if not agree, at least come to a mutual understanding. So, for example, not necessarily agree, but come to a mutual understanding. A lot of my friends are one of their top issues is the degree to which the borders were open or seemed open, and what they deem as the immigration, the problems around immigration. For me, I'm not going to pretend that that's a big concern for me. It's not. And if you tell me I should be, then I would say stop shooting on me, right? It's just I have concerns, but that's not one of my top ones. At the same time, I will say, listen, I don't judge you or think you're a bad person for that being I get that that's a real concern for you. And I get why you would have legitimate critiques of the last administration. I get that. So if there's not, that's what I mean by saying if there's not necessarily agreement on a set of priorities, at least there's understanding about why that would be a priority. There's also, I think there's broad agreement, even if there's not acknowledgement. I mentioned one before, that engaging in violence as a form of protest is not enshrined within our constitutional order. And it's not something that I would affirm or try to excuse or try to pretend that it's not happening, right? So I think there's agreement there. Where, but where there's not agreement is the degree to which that violence is happening, or where there's also not agreement is the legitimacy of the protests that are occurring. Where there's not agreement is the Trump administration's actions by sending in not just what is it called, calling up the National Guard, but also sending in federal troops, Marines, and then So
Yeah.
anyway, I'm bringing this in the context of like what we can agree upon, if not at least understand each other about, where there's also disagreement. But I'd love for you to talk about it. I'd love for you to help us make sense of what led to the protests and the escalation of all of these tensions in our city.
Yeah. Well, the way I think about it is what's happening in Los Angeles now happened in Chicago a couple months ago. It happened in New York about a month ago. It's going to happen in other major urban areas right now. Trump administration, before President Trump was even elected, he said, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to go and I'm going to find undocumented immigrants and I'm going to deport them and I'm going to deport millions of them. And people said, okay, you got my vote, right, for that and perhaps lots of other reasons. So on the one hand, he's doing exactly what he said he was going to do, and it's not a surprise. To those of us who didn't vote for the guy or don't believe that's a good strategy, we're now looking at these scenes with horror, even though in a way, we all saw it coming. So listen, there's absolute merit in thinking if you are cheating the system, you do not deserve the rewards of the system because you're a cheater and you don't deserve that. And I get how it really offends people's sense of fairness to think one, undocumented immigrants they're skipping the line, they're crossing the border, they're not waiting their turn, they're not following our protocols, they're not looking to assimilate with as much vigor as those who have intentionally allowed to come in. So I get that there's a lot of that hostility. I get that as people come across the border who are not documented, some of those people could be violent criminals. Like that is a fact. There's probably some criminal elements among them. Maybe not all of them or most of them or even a large portion of them, but some. And so there's certain facts about what's happening that we're like, okay, fine, I understand that those facts. What are also facts are looking at things like, do undocumented immigrants, are they a net plus or a net minus to the US economy? And to ask that question, like who would be an authority on that? So you talk to economic experts, and I've done a bunch of this when I was at Procon. We talked to, I don't even, dozens of people on this issue and gotten some of the best studies out there. And in general, there is a consensus that undocumented immigrants are a net plus to the US economy because they're performing roles and services that are otherwise not being met. They are essential for the construction trades, essential for the agricultural trades in this country. And so by taking them out of the equation, we are significantly disrupting those industries that are heavily reliant on that type of labor. So if we don't like that, there's a lot of ways we can address it. Look, if we have a labor shortage in certain high skilled but low education areas like construction and like agriculture, we can train and develop those people too. Are we doing that? No. What is the consequence of a failed educational system? It's this. It's an influx of people saying, "Hey, I'll take that job. I need that job. My family wants to do better, be better. So there's someone's going to pay me. I'm going to go there. I just have to get past this border issue, and then there'll be plenty of people who will say yes to me, even though there's this line of people who are going to say no to me." And so once they make it in, then there's plenty of opportunity. So I understand that. So what is the problem that we're solving here? The problem that we really need to solve is how are we going to get our economic engines met with a suitable workforce to perform those tasks? And if we can't develop it on our own, if we cannot, put people through the trade programs and become construction apprentices and become, know how to perform seasonal agricultural labor, then if we can't do that, then maybe we do like President George W. Bush was advocating, and like we used to have in the 30s, this Bracero program where we bring in seasonal workers, where you know the name of every person to come in, and then you know the name of every person who's going out, and whoever hasn't gone out, now it's a problem. Right now, if an undocumented person comes into the country, it's hard for them to leave because that means on exit, they're caught on exit. Now it's caught that, oh, you shouldn't have been here in the first place, and there's bigger consequences to pay. But if there was a program that allowed for this kind of seasonal work, then great. So that is a fixable problem. And that requires the will in Congress. And we haven't passed meaningful legislation reform in immigration since like 1986. So
Yeah.
I look at this as Congress is broken. That's our fault. That's not an undocumented immigration problem. Our trade schools are not educating enough people in the skilled labors that we desperately need as a country. That's not undocumented immigrants' fault. That's our fault as a nation. That is a legislative, it's a policy problem, and that's one that we can fix if we had the will and the skill. And we're just not seeing that. So that's why I believe that a lot of these solutions are political solutions. They are not criminal and prosecutorial solutions. They're not, let's just round up as many people who have violated our rules and protocols and get them out of here. What are we going to do in general? Like the problem will still exist that we need people to pick lettuce and strawberries and feed our country. We will still have this problem of who's going to build the houses for while we're in a major housing shortage. The majority of bricklayers and masonry work that's done in the United States right now, more than 50% is by an undocumented workforce. We have to fix those kinds of problems in this country, and whether we deport our way through the Trump administration and make that a priority, it's not going to solve this underlying problem. So let's just focus on that problem. And that's where my head is at, saying like this whole immediate short-term terrible issue that we have with violence in the streets, major disruptions to our not just traffic, but our way of life, because certain square blocks of a city can be completely overwhelmed by ICE and Marines and National Guard and the tremendous cost of that economically. I mean, just LA is going to eat hundreds of millions of dollars. The federal government has already said just sending in the National Guard is over $110 million. We have much better use for that fund. Like, hey, how about we just took all that money and funded a trade school or two, right? Wouldn't that be a smart thing to do? So I'm just looking at the solution side of it and saying, guys, what are we doing? What are we doing? Let's focus on the real problems and not these made up problems that we are imposing on ourselves. And we have to go into it with that mindset. And I think most Americans want that. Most
Hmm.
Americans want that. And it's hard for us to see that because we're so caught up in what you described as this crack from our media diet that we're forgetting that, hey, we're neighbors and people, and we care about how people are educated. We care about our food supply. We care about building homes and paying people fair wages. Like we genuinely care about these things, but sometimes we forget because we're in this fight, flight, or freeze cycle that our news cycles have put us in, and we are better than that. And that's why I look to programs like yours, Corey, and to the work we're doing at the Center for the Political Future and what some few but courageous politicians and civic leaders are doing to focus on our real problems and build consensus to address root causes so that we can move forward as a country.
Yeah, I have the pleasure of talking to a fellow named Dan Mock, whose his specialty is First Amendment law. He's currently working for the ACLU. I'm curious to ask him about what I've been thinking of as both the horizontal balance of power and the vertical balance of power. So we've seen the Trump administration strain and in some cases circumvent the horizontal balance of power, that being across the branches of government, legislative, executive, judicial. And I think those are only going to be further strained. But now what we're seeing now is what I'm thinking of as the vertical balance of power from the federal, state to the local. What I'm curious about is the degree to which a state executive, a state chief executive, in this case Gavin Newsom, or you mentioned Chicago, so that would be J.B. Pritzker in Illinois. How bold, how brazen might they be in pushing back their sovereignty in that vertical balance of power? What tools do they have? Of course, I wouldn't advocate for something that's extra constitutional, extra legal, but I think this moment calls for some bold and brazen action in return. So I'm curious to talk to Dan about that. I'd be curious to talk. I've gotten the pleasure of speaking with David French, who comes from the conservative legal movement. I've written to him about this, but I think my illustrations were a little bit off. He wrote that book in was it 2019, where he gave a couple of imaginary scenarios about one set of chapters was about the imaginary scenario about Cal exit. And then the other one was the Texas, I forgot what he called it, Texas exit, the secession scenarios. So I'd be curious to revisit with him about we're not far down that road of reality, but we're walking in that direction. It seems like, you know.
I completely agree with that. I mean, there's scholars who have studied civil wars, and all of the criteria that you need to have a civil war, we basically have met all of them and then some. And so,
Mm,
and some
yeah.
people think we're already in a civil war, but instead of fighting it necessarily with bullets and guns, we're fighting it with pens and keyboards, and that same degree of hostility and inequality exists in our society today. That sort of tribalism that's like we talked about, the I'm right, you're evil side of things. It's pervasive, and it's affected so much of how people live their lives, where they work, whether their workplace reflects their own values. Like Gen Z, especially, they will not work at places that have values that are not their values in increasing numbers. And we look at if you're a conservative and you live in the Los Angeles area, many of those people are saying, why am I living here? I don't have any kind of political representation. Maybe I'll go to Nevada, maybe I'll go to Arizona, maybe I'll move to Texas, and vice versa. Folks in Democrats in red states who are thinking, you know what's better? California. At least I'm with my own kind. And because we're a highly mobile society, we're just seeing a lot more of that happening across this country. And so we'll continue to experience what Bill Bishop calls the big sort,
Yeah.
where we're sorting ourselves out based on these ideological characteristics. Politics has become sort of a meta identity, the biggest of all identities, even though we may say, oh, I'm not really that attached to this or that party. You may say that, but really, when you peel away one layer, you absolutely do relate to one side or the other, and it does become a huge area for judging whether someone is a friend or enemy.
I think we're living in the perfect place. I've talked to Lisa about the next chapter of our lives, where we might live, and I'm always thinking about lower cost of living and things, some practical things like that. So I've brought up the idea of living in Tennessee or Texas, thinking about state income tax, things like that, and she was born in Alabama.
Hmm.
So your neighbor,
Neighbors,
Louisiana.
yeah.
And when we first met in 1993, if she thought about anything politically, we were in our early 20s, so we didn't really think much about it. But if she did think about it, she thought like a girl from Alabama, like Ronald Reagan and George Bush, and yeah. But now since the era of Trump, she's a lefty. She is pretty far left. So when I mentioned Texas or Tennessee, I could never live there.
Ah,
But we do happen to live. I've shared this many times on the show that we happen to live in a district. California 27 was decided in 2020 by 333 votes out of almost 350,000 that were cast. And if you look at our state Senate seat that Suzette Valladares, the Republican state legislator, just won, it was similarly close. The state assembly Pilar the Democrat, has had a pretty strong showing the last couple of cycles. But if you look at all the state and local, one of the coolest things I saw actually was a buddy of mine, Jason Gibbs, who's on the city council, who they're technically undeclared or whatever it is. They're not supposed to have a party affiliation,
yeah.
but at least four of the five people on the city council in Santa Clarita are pretty, they're Fox News watching, pretty hardcore, Trump supporting. And Jason Gibbs was talking to the newly elected George Whitesides, a Democrat,
Mm.
who took the California 27 seat from Mike Garcia. But to your point, they were talking about, uh, I think it was they were talking about the old road. There's construction being, and by the way, that's literally the name of this road. It's called the Old Road.
Oh, what a great name. Okay.
Yeah, they were talking about construction on the old road. Like, hey, we can come together on building roads, right? So anyway, that does give me hope. So one of my last questions, and then we'll start to wrap it up. It's the TPNR question. We've kind of already been talking about this, but I'll put a fine point on it. What do you think each of us can do to be able to share space with, have better conversations with, and even nurture relationships with people across our differences? So people who have different backgrounds and beliefs than we do, who get their news from different sources than we do. How can we do better at talking politics and religion without killing each other, or is it even possible?
It's very possible. Every one of us is capable of it. And if we say we're not, we're wrong. It's absolutely possible. And I'd give 5 bits of advice and I'll just hit them quick. Number one, listen. You got two ears, one mouth, use them in that proportion. Number two, seek opposing views. And that may take some effort, but you can go to ground news, all sides. You can triangulate your way through Google News. Just get a wide range of your media diet. So you're not just eating French fries. You want
And
to,
just so folks know that Kami is a man of his word. He doesn't just talk the talk. We were having this conversation via email before we, in the days prior to doing this, and he was saying some of the same things, ground news and triangulate through, the
yeah.
researches. So
It's
good
so
stuff.
true, man. These are lessons learned from a long time of doing things badly. So I say this with respect and with also with every intention of actually being useful to people and not just saying it because it sounds good. I really mean it. Like really triangulate the news, get news from different sources. Be generous in interpreting intention from someone. If they've said something that's triggered you, then ask yourself, did they really mean it that way? Can you ask them to reframe it or restate it in a different way to make sure you heard it right? So I'd say be generous in interpreting intention. I'd say another one is thinking slow versus thinking fast. We have our biological impulses happen at faster than the speed of light, right? They're instantaneous within our brains, and we're making constant judgments, uh, millions of them every minute. And thinking slowly means taking a pause. So, for instance, if we see something that might be threatening while walking down the street, or you heard something on the news that you think, oh my gosh, that's the worst. Thinking slowly might be asking yourself some filtering questions. What source am I listening to? Have I considered other sources? Where else have I heard this? How quality is this information? Am I being triggered? What's going on inside my heart? Did I sleep enough last night? And really just slowing down the thought pattern to where you can get to the part of your brain that's this prefrontal cortex, that's the real you. That's the one that has been highly educated, that can make rational decisions. Otherwise, it's all knee jerk, knee jerk, knee jerk all day long based on the inputs that we're getting from this fire hose of information called our 24/7 news cycle. So think slowly is my fourth bit of advice. And my final bit of advice is this concept called superordination. And that is a concept in psychology where instead of trying to find common ground, like, hey, both of our grandmothers like quilting, and we just discovered that after 30 minutes of talking, superordination is realizing that you already have common ground under your feet. So if I like the Dodgers and you like the Angels, superordination means, hey, we both like LA baseball. And if you and I like baseball, Corey, but our pal Liz, she just likes football, then guess what? We superordinate and we all like sports. Or if, hey, the three of us like sports, but this other person, they think sports is boring. They like politics. Well, superordination means we all like competition. And we can do that, this concept of superordination with any group. And ultimately, you'll find that everyone is in your in group because ultimately we're all human beings and everyone's in our in group for that reason. So it's just reframing. And that concept, I think, is my fifth bit of advice. If we do all of that, we have zero excuses to get along, at least on some level, with the neighbor who is we think is rude sometimes, with a colleague who just won't stop talking about what they saw on the news, or with that one really difficult employee in our lives, or that one, well, whoever it is, will find some opportunity if you do one or all of those five things.
I love it. Superordination. We have common ground under our feet. It's the opposite. I heard a comedian do an entire half hour routine that did just the opposite, where he starts with, I don't know, we're all Americans, right? Then he starts to, oh, well, those people in the South. And then he gets granular to where it's Alabama versus Auburn. And then even within Alabama, it's, oh, you guys are the scholarship kids, just keeps on going
Beautiful.
down. So there's superordination. So listen, seek opposing views, be generous in interpreting intention, thinking slow versus thinking fast, and we already have common ground under our feet. I love it. Now you get to turn the tables on me. Do you have any questions for me?
I know, Corey, I could ask you questions for days, but one of the things I'm really curious about is because you are a very open person, you'll talk about whatever, and are very curious and open-minded. But there's got to be some things you don't like to talk about. So my question for you is really, what don't you like to talk about, and is that a good thing?
Wow, that is a hard one because my brain just went somewhere. And I'll share it this way. When I was a kid, uh, I forget if it was a formal debate in one of our social studies classes, or if it was just a conversation in the lunchroom, in the cafeteria after one of these social studies classes. But I posited the notion that I was okay with having women police officers, but I thought that they should pass the same physical tests when they went through training as male police officers did. And boy, that was not a popular opinion.
I see.
So there are certain subjects that I I tread much more carefully, and part of it is it's kind of like I've gotten rhetorically beaten up quite a bit over some of these. More recently, I don't know if you watched it or heard about it, but Dave Chappelle's The Closer special.
Yeah.
A bunch of part of my business is in the entertainment industry, and I have a number of at least a dozen friends who work at Netflix, several of whom were part of those walkouts,
Uh,
trying to say that they shouldn't air that special. And then a bunch of folks within the entertainment, creative advertising, that space. There were a lot of online conversations, and I I made a similar, what I thought was a nuanced point, which was, listen, I watched the whole thing. There were certain parts of it that were cringeworthy to me. It was uncomfortable. But one is, did you get to the end of it? Because he was making a much more profound point than the jokes that you found really offensive, right? Or the jokes, they weren't really jokes. It was more of like his thing, his message. But the bigger point that I was trying to make was that whether I agreed with what he was saying or not only does Dave Chappelle have that right in the spirit of the freedom of speech, but Netflix also has the right to either platform him or not. I
Right.
wasn't trying to make an argument for transgender folks or anti-transgender. I was making the argument that whether, especially when we disagree or feel offended, is when we should support the spirit of the freedom of speech. And man, that was that was pretty hard. The pushback that I got from dear friends of mine, and this is several years ago now. It's taken. I'm actually going out to lunch with somebody that was one of my most the loudest and harshest critics. I'm going out to lunch with her on Friday. We ended up. The happy part of that is that our relationship was very tense and was at risk of just completely coming apart. So we had to back away from each other for a while.
Mhm.
And it was hurtful because I really care about this person. We eventually got back together. We talked through things. I understood why it was such a hot button issue for her, like why there was such sensitivity. I understood the stories of the people that she's close with that have suffered, not just rhetorically, but literally physically
Yeah.
because of who they are. So that's where my brain goes, is that there are certain subjects that where folks have literally been harmed, where it's difficult not just to bring up both sides, but maybe nuance within those when you're dealing with those subjects. So, gosh, yeah, I don't know that. I don't know if that's a tough question
It's,
because
I think I
because
understand.
there's things that I would say that I don't want to say, you know?
Well, what I'm hearing, and tell me if this is right, it sounds like those conversations about free speech, when you are in a position where you naturally want to defend free speech, but you're defending a specific free speech that someone else sees as hate speech. And now you're in the position of defending what they see as hate speech. And that's not a position you want to be in.
Yeah, and I've made it clear that I'm not trying to defend that position. And I don't feel a need to defend a certain position. For example, someone who is accused of uh, sex trafficking or what is it called when children are involved? Um, they still need to be given due process, right? So I'm not trying to justify one's actions. I'm not trying to whitewash some atrocious actions and behaviors and the harm that it's done to so many human beings. That's not what I'm doing. But if I advocate for due process of the individuals who are accused of such, right? That's it's a it's hard to go there because it sounds like I'm trying to justify child pornography or something like that, right? So those are the ones that, man, it's still, maybe I just don't know how to do it well. There are some really great advocates for the rule of law and for ethics around these things. Greg Lukianoff comes to mind.
Yeah.
But I don't, I still don't know how to navigate that treacherous territory quite well yet.
It's a really difficult for any human being to do, and it really takes some like superpower attorneys to be able to do it. Like in the case of the ACLU defending the rights of Nazis to march, not because they agree with Nazis, but because they believe that they have the right to march.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
we've seen that time and again where someone who is a super progressive, and this is true, there's a great documentary film about it, a super progressive attorney who's defending one of the January 6th insurrectionists because of some procedural element of their case and thinking that that person has the right to a fair trial and not getting one, and I believe they deserve it. And so these are kind of process issues that uh, that we defend these processes because ultimately we're a nation of laws and we're really, in a way, kind of defending these rules and norms for everybody's benefit, not just the side that we happen to agree with.
You know
Um,
how I might be able to get better at it is if I attended a program like the Distinguished Leaders Program.
hey,
How's that for a segue?
ooh, brilliant, brilliant. Yeah.
Tell us about the Distinguished Leaders Program.
Well, I'm really proud to be associated with this program because it's for people who are 50, 60, 70 years old. They've had successful careers. They're mid-level executives, in many cases, senior executives who've made a lot of money, been very successful. And now they're thinking, that's great, but what I'd really like to do in this world is to make sure that kids have a square meal every day when they go to school. Or I really want to make sure that it's easy for first responders to live in their communities, even though housing costs are so expensive. What's really important to me is that teenage girls don't feel this tremendous sense of anxiety when they go to school because they feel like they're being cyberbullied or don't have any friends. So there's these issues and causes that are deeply important to them, and they just haven't focused their careers on them. So Distinguished Leaders is a program that says, hey, senior executives, want to come back to school? Remember when Rodney Dangerfield did it? Not back to
Right.
school. So go back to school. And for a 6-month program, you will learn from people who can help you take these ideas and turn them into projects, businesses, foundations, nonprofit organizations, lobbying efforts, or pass legislation around it so that you can achieve the social good that you're hoping to see in the world. And
That's
this
awesome.
leaders program is open to anybody. It's run through USC, different universities. Stanford has a similar program. Harvard has a program. I'm, of course, biased to the USC program because I'm part of it. And I'd encourage anybody who is looking for how can I really make impact in the next act of my life, think about the Distinguished Leaders Program at USC.
That's great. Yeah, and there's endeavors now. I'm right in that age range. I started thinking when I read not David Brooks' last book, but the book before that, The Second Mountain.
Mm,
I was already going about thinking about what the next chapter was for me.
right.
And that book certainly helped me begin to formulate ideas. This program is very much an outgrowth of that inquiry, that personal taking personal inventory. But I would imagine also the Alliance for Entertainment Advertising Arts, a nonprofit that we started during COVID, was
Mm,
a result of that. But I would imagine that I would have I would be a much better leader and much more effective. Certainly with the nonprofit that we started, with the equipping that could happen through the Distinguished Leaders Program. So thanks for doing that.
of course.
Before we go, how can we follow you, find more information about USC Dornsife Center for the Political Future, and just all the great work that you're doing?
Well, Google USC Center for the Political Future. Anybody can subscribe to our newsletter. All the programs that we operate, and there's about 80 of them a year. They're in person. They're also on Zoom. They're live streamed onto Facebook. They're video recorded onto YouTube and audio recorded for our podcast, Let's Find Common Ground. And anyone can participate in any of them. So it's a if you want to see Democrat and Republican leaders talking to each other respectfully, finding common ground on issues, check us out. If you have a young person who's looking for a political internship or looking to make a difference in the world and somehow in politics or politics adjacent, send them our way and we can help orient them in really productive ways. Whether they're liberals or conservatives doesn't matter. We just want young people to care about politics. They should. We need them. We need them. And so they can find me through those ways for those reasons. And then beyond that, just leaning into the Democracy Groups podcast. There's so many good programs on there, so many great guests, and all really trying to orient our nation in towards a more productive cause for all of us. We all want to have better lives, safer lives. We want our children to be more successful than we were, and the ways that we can do that is by working together, not working at odds with one another. So my orientation, and I know everyone in the democracy group really is, how can we do this together, regardless of your ideology? And I believe passionately in that subject, and so the best way to find me is through those sources I mentioned, or by doing that work yourself. In which case, hey, we're fellow travelers.
Amen to that. So thanks for doing this. We did cover a lot, but and we have to do it again because there's so much more to talk about. But before we go for this one, is there anything important we haven't discussed you'd like to add?
Thanks for the offer, Corey. No, I mean, we covered so much, man. I'm really happy with this conversation. We talked about local politics, national politics, the
Yeah.
roots of polarization, about our media cycle and its addictive nature, and just brain chemistry. We've talked about so many things. I feel like we've given this audience a whole lot to consider for now. But listen, if you want me back, I'll do it anytime for any reason. Like I said, I'm a big fan of yours. I really am. And I think what you're doing is fabulous, and I want to be part of it.
Oh, thanks so much, Kami. Really great hanging out with you, and we're not too far apart from each other. So hopefully this summer in between semesters will be a little, have a little gaps in it because I want to come down and hang out, grab some sushi or beers or something, and just do it in person.
I see drinks and raw fish in our future.
Absolutely. That's great. That's great. And as always, if you dig what we're doing here, remember to follow the show, write the review, do all the things. You can watch these conversations on YouTube. It's youtube.com/at politics and religion. And I am at Corey S. Nathan, at Corey S as in Sam, Nathan on all the socials as well as Substack. Now go talk some politics and religion with gentleness and respect, and have a great week.
Rest in peace, lie stone.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Corey.
Awesome.